Buenas tardes a todos. Bienvenido a esta sesión, but I will continue in English. In this session on the national implementation of the International Classification of Crime for statistical purposes. So I would guess that many of you are already familiar with the ICCS, the International Classification. But I see also that some of you may not be. So I will, to the benefit of everybody who has heard of it for the first time, give a short overview. And then we have three distinguished speakers today who will provide us a lot more insight on the ICCS from the national perspective. So what is the ICCS? It's a statistical classification of crime that tries to basically contain all possible criminal acts and give a place to each of these acts in a coherent, consistent, hierarchical framework. It is the first classification at the international level, and it is for statistical purposes, as its name says. So it does not in any way have a moral claim or a normative claim, meaning that countries should change their laws or anything like that. But it's a way to classify crime for statistical purposes and to enhance the consistency of crime data collection, improve the comparability of crime data. It's been a very, very intense and elaborate effort to develop the crime classification. It took 7 years. It was built together with the inputs of many, many countries and experts. In total, over 77 countries worldwide have been participating in the process of building the classification. 10 international organizations have been active and contributing as well. And it's been successful because it is not built on legal codes of any particular country, but it's built on a behavioral description of crime, of criminal acts that can be applied in any legal context. And, by the way, it can be applied across the criminal justice spectrum, so it can be applied for police data, prosecution, courts, prison data, but also across different sources, meaning that the definitions and descriptions should also be applicable for crime victimization surveys, of which we have heard quite a lot the last few days. To cut short, the ICCS, at the end of this long process of development, entered a new era by being adopted at the international level by the United Nations Statistical Commission in March 2015. And by the Commission of Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice in May 2015. And the same commissions have also endorsed an implementation plan, a draft implementation plan. The commissions have endorsed the UNODC to be the custodian of the convention, of the classification. Meaning also that we take the lead in assisting countries to implement the ICCS at the national level. Since it has been implemented, there have been a number of activities and a lot of interest in its implementation. We had 2 expert group meetings already, one in June 2015, and the last expert group meeting was in May 2016, last month, And that was also the first meeting of the Technical Advisory Group, which is a group of countries, in total over 50 countries, that work to keep the classification updated and provide a link to the national level to help the implementation. Clarify issues and help to develop tools for implementation, such as a manual, which will come in several volumes, but the first volume will be on mapping crimes from the national level into the ICCS. And we will hear a bit about this from our speakers today. Just to say at the end that the interest and the activities from the side of the countries have been really beyond expectations. So far, there has been a lot of activity, a lot of willingness and interest to implement the classification. Several countries have started already to translate into their national languages. I should also say I brought a few copies with me. The ICCS has been translated so far into Spanish, French and Russian, and of course the English version, and in Arabic and Chinese. Plus several countries are translating into their own language, including Korean, Thailandese, I don't know, some other languages as well. So there has been a lot of activities and interest, and it's my pleasure really to welcome to this session 3 experts, I would really say, on the classification who have been present at its creation throughout the last few years and have been active participants in its development. And I will introduce them, I think, all at once, and then ask them to present in turn. So our first speaker today will be Mr. Thomas Baumann, to my left, who is from the Federal Statistical Office of Germany. Thomas is the head of the section Criminal Justice Statistics, and he's also a member, or the German representative of at the Eurostat working group on crime and criminal justice statistics. So he will be able to tell us something about his work at the national level, where the Statistical Office is working closely with the Federal Criminal Police Office together on the crime classification, and perhaps also a few words on the work at the European level, where Eurostat has been a very active proponent of the ICCS and is translating it into the 24 languages of the European Union. The next, in the middle of our panel, the next speaker will be Mr. Edgar Guerrero from INEGI, Mexico, which you all know. Edgar is, and I need to read this because it's quite a long title, is the Deputy Director General of Government Information, Policies and National Government Census in the, again, Directorate General on Government, Public Security and Justice Statistics in INEGI. I hope I have correctly summarized this. And Edgar has been very supportive also from the beginning, together with INEGI, which has been a major proponent of the ICCS and has supported the process also through the UNODC INEGI Center of Excellence. And I remember we have been all 3 in meetings in Vienna and in Mexico City, working on the classification. And last but not least, to my very left is Mr. Alan Beck, who is the senior statistical advisor in the United States Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is part of the US Department of Justice. And well, maybe I should just say that the role of Alan in the development of the ICCS has been a very important one. We have greatly contributed through him, from the expertise of the Bureau of Justice, from his personal expertise. And I should also say that, and hopefully Alan will explain more about this, the United States has recently appointed a commission at the national level, the Academy of Sciences, to adopt a proposal for a new crime classification in the United States. And we should be very, very proud to see that this is more or less a full endorsement of the ICCS. I would, a rough estimate, think that it's 98% the same, which I think also speaks to the good work that our distinguished guests have been making. So, without further ado, I would like to hand the word over to Thomas. Thomas, please.
Okay, I'll start again. Good evening together. Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. I give you a short impression in our work on ICCS mapping in Germany. Mapping is corresponding table between national statistical classification on the one hand and international classification ICCS on the other hand. I structured my slide in two parts. The first part is to give you a framework overview on ICCS mapping in Germany, as ICCS mapping is not in an empty space in Germany, but it is embedded in an established framework of statistical infrastructure. In the second part of my presentation, I show you how the ICCS mapping works within this statistical infrastructure. The infrastructure consists of an organizational aspect. It is the role of our statistical office. On the one other hand, it consists of statistical classifications still available at national level. The role of our statistical office at federal level is a coordination role. Primary within the ESSS, it is the European Statistical System. It consists at the top of this figure of Eurostat, the Statistical Office of the European Union, consisting of 28 countries. And in the middle of this figure, it is our Federal Statistical Office. And at the bottom of this figure, you see the subnational statistical offices, As the term federal indicates, Germany consists of a federal level and of state levels, 16 state levels, and each of these states have own ministries of justice and of interior, and they have their own statistical offices. And our role is within this European statistical system to coordinate data collections at European level, at international level, like UNCTS, on the one hand, and on the other hand, to make annual meetings with our national subnational statistical offices in order to update our national statistical classification to changes in our national law. Regarding the global level, we are in close cooperation with UNODC regarding the ICCS. For example, in the United Nations Statistical Commission in March 2015, our office was involved when it was endorsed. And again, we are a member of the TEC ICCS, taking part in Vienna in May. And we do a start of ICCS mapping via correspondence tables. As Michael said, we do it together with the Central Federal Police Office, as in Germany there is a situation that justice statistics is conducted independently from police statistics. Police statistics is conducted within the Federal Criminal Office, and justice statistics is conducted within the Federal Statistical Office together with the subnational statistical offices. Coming to the second point of our existing statistical infrastructure, it is national statistical classification. On the one hand, as I mentioned, police crime statistic, and on the other hand, criminal justice statistics. Both kinds of national statistical classifications are based on the national criminal law. So our national statistical classifications are based on legal codes, other than ICCS, Michael mentioned, on behavioral codes. The task is now how to get the bridge from national statistics based on legal codes to international statistics based on behavioral codes. And we managed this task without our existing framework. The left part of this figure is the same. New is the right part. It is international statistical classification. And the combination, the bridge, is a joint correspondence table we developed together with the Federal Criminal Office. It consists of all the statistical classifications existing in Germany for the whole country regarding police statistics and the criminal justice classification for the whole country regarding to justice statistics. And in addition, the codes of ICCS are implemented. So we have a table with 3 colors. ICCS, as Michael mentioned, was adopted in March 2015. It consists of 11 chapters or sections in which there are single definitions of criminal acts at an international level. Acts leading to death is the section we used as a starting point in our matching process. So the first question in our mapping process was, what is ICCS talking on? What is a criminal act, and especially what is act leading to death? And especially within that category, what is intentional homicide? So according to ICCS, unlawful death inflicted upon a person with the intent to cause death or serious injury. Reflecting on this definition, we find 3 criteria. It is an objective criteria, a subjective criteria, and a legal criteria. The objective criteria is that there is a person that is dead due to the action of another person. So it is not suicide, for example. The subjective element is the action was done intentionally by the other person. So it is not an accident. And the legal act is the killing act violates national criminal law. As Michael said, it is not, the ICCS does not reflect each single legal code, but the precondition is that it should be punishable. It should be unlawful in national law. Based on this, we have on the other side the national law. So we have now to have a look. That was the first step. What is ICCS talking on? The next step is what is our national law talking on regarding acts leading to death, regarding intentional homicide. The problem is that in our law there is no English, there is a German language. So there is no homicide, no intentional homicide, no act leading to death. So we have to have a look in our criminal code. What is an unlawful act, like required in the definition of intentional homicide in our criminal code? Our criminal code consists of the core criminal code, the German criminal code, Strafgesetzbuch, and supplementary criminal law. For example, narcotic acts or traffic acts. I concentrate my presentation on the core German criminal code that consists of two parts. The first part gives us the first incidence, a formal definition of unlawful acts in Germany. And the second part gives, in 30 chapters, more substantial definitions of, for example, murder, that is a correspondence to intentional homicide. The part one, as I mentioned, is a formal definition. What is an unlawful act? Not every action is unlawful, and not every action is punishable. So our criminal code distinguishes Verbrechen and Vergehen. Verbrechen is the most more criminal act than Vergehen. The distinction is the kind of punishable. In a Verbrechen is a minimum sentence of 1 year's imprisonment. That's not in Vergehen, but Vergehen at least has a fine as a sentence. The precondition in our law is no punishment without law. So in the moment an offender makes an offense and there is no law, it is not a criminal offense. It is no criminal act. Let's have a look on the second part in our German criminal code, the substantial definitions in 30 chapters. The acts leading to death we can find in the chapter 16, Straftaten gegen das Leben. That is the primary source when we are looking for acts that fit to the ICCS definition of intentional homicide and on homicide non-intentional. The problem is that these kinds of acts defined in ICCS section 1 are not only in one chapter of our criminal code, but they are spread throughout our criminal code. So the task was to check our criminal code regarding the acts defined in ICCS. As ICCS is an action-based definition, behavioral code, we decomposed our German criminal code in an action element and in a sanction element, punishment element. The punishment element I mentioned before regards is it a Verbrechen or a Vergehen. In this case, there are two kinds of Verbrechen, two kinds of acts from the chapter 16 in our German criminal code. It is paragraph 211 and 212. In both cases, the three elements of the ICCS definition of intentional homicide are completely fulfilled. So, in both kinds, there is a person kills another person. It is intentionally, and the result is that the person is dead. So, it is only completed murder, completed Totschlag, it is called in Germany, not attempted. And regarding the definition of offenses, I only concentrate on the left part, the if condition, the action element. So all three elements of the ICCS definition are fulfilled. This is the core of intentional homicide in our criminal law. The most serious punishment is 211 imprisonment for life. How is this criminal code implemented in our national statistical classification? This is a question, as the national statistical classification is the first part of the correspondence table we create to ICCS. So, the national statistical classification relates to the national criminal law, as I mentioned, and this is an extract from our classification used in justice statistics, not in police statistics, in justice statistics. So, the classification consists of a tabulation code on the left side. The tabulation code consists of a number for the offense group. That is only an internal, with internal relevance. Then the next part is a chapter in the German Criminal Code. For example, chapter 16 is mord, I mentioned so far. But there are other chapters, like 17, like 20, relating to the first section of ICCS, acts leading to death. At the right color, there is a name of the offense in our national language. And as I mentioned, the tabulation code refers to the chapter in our criminal code. Let's have a look on the last step we do in mapping national criminal code to ICCS. You have at the left side the ICCS code. It is in each row the same code for intentional homicide. The second color is the justice statistic national classification I just presented to you. Then the third color is new color. It is from police crime statistic, the national classification. The national name of the offense again, and on the right side the ICCS name of the offense. So in this example there are much more offenses mentioned, but it is only an extract of our draft correspondence table. But these are the offenses we classified as intentional homicide. That was a short impression of the steps we did so far. Now let me make some statements on the outlook. Our future priorities are, at first, to evaluate what we did already, to evaluate ICCS Section 1. Evaluation is our team making this correspondence table will meet again and review the experience we get at the tech meeting ICCS in Vienna in May and on the reviews we get at this meeting. In addition, we try to start the next section of ICCS, and we start to check the translation English to German we got from Eurostat. And again, if we finished our work, at least at the end of this year to Section 1, then starts an ongoing updated correspondence table process. It is, the basic work is done, but you can see on this final slide, again, the principle of national statistical classification process, annual meeting of statistical offices, annual updating regarding national criminal law changes, but in addition, changes in international statistical classification can be mentioned as well in our joint correspondence table. So it is a complete ongoing updating process implemented, embedded in our so far existing statistical infrastructure. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for this insightful presentation. I'm giving the floor to Edgar, please.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon to all of you. First of all, let me say that even though I'm part of the organizers' institutions, let me thank to inviting me to this session in this conference. But secondly, let me express my pleasure to be part of this session. I mean, to share all these experiences with you three. All of you are what I call the third wave on the international crime classifications, and I will talk briefly about what I refer about these waves. And last, I mean, before I start with my presentation, let me tell you that I will switch to Spanish to a better explanation of my presentation, and more because I have an example that is more clear if I explain this in Spanish, so the ones that are not Spanish speakers may use your earphones. So, empezaré entonces con la presentación. Yo voy a platicar un poco sobre cómo estamos implementando la clasificación internacional de delitos al contexto mexicano. Bien, la presentación está dividida en tres partes. Voy a platicar brevemente del contexto en el que se dan tanto la clasificación nacional, la que ya está operando en México, como la internacional, y cómo es que estas dos en el tiempo tienen muchas similitudes. La segunda parte tendrá que ver con la implementación ya per se de la clasificación internacional al contexto nacional y los retos que estamos visualizando al día de hoy en esta implementación. Bien, déjenme platicarles en una línea de tiempo cuáles son las acciones que hemos venido haciendo respecto a la clasificación internacional. Esta clasificación en realidad no es nueva, tenemos ya muchos años intentando medir o entender el fenómeno delictivo a partir de la estadística, y uno de los criterios fundamentales en la estadística es tener clasificadores, justamente para poder estandarizar la información, para poder hacerla comparable y sobre todo para poder tomar decisiones con esa información, y más en fenómenos que trascienden fronteras y que requieren de acciones comunes. Entonces, el primer hallazgo que tenemos, al menos en México, de un esfuerzo clasificador se remonta al año de 1926, donde hay una recolección de delitos en la capital del país, en juzgados penales de primera instancia, y hay un primer esfuerzo clasificador, es decir, a partir de un cuestionario se recolectan datos en los juzgados solamente de la capital, y este ejercicio se mantuvo durante muchos años. Obviamente fue evolucionando cada año que se solicitaba información a los juzgados, pero podríamos decir que desde 1929 hasta 1989 toda esa recolección de datos que se daba en el país fue creciendo geográficamente, incluso en la cantidad de delitos que se captaban. El INEGI entonces empezó a generar, a partir de la recolección de esos datos, lo que nosotros llamamos anuarios estadísticos, que es la presentación a final de cuentas de los datos que se recolectan. Y estos pues ocurrieron entre el 29 y el 89, presentando datos, y entonces de manera práctica estábamos ya como país clasificando los delitos. Es hasta el 90 donde surge la idea, hasta 1990, donde surge la idea de hacer un catálogo de delitos. Justamente a partir de toda la recolección de datos que se venía dando, surge ya la necesidad de estandarizar, es decir, empezamos por recolectar, pero posteriormente surge la necesidad ya de estandarizar, y se da la primera idea a partir de lo que se denomina el catálogo de delitos, que surge, insisto, de la recolección de datos, no al revés, no de un catálogo fuimos a recolectar, sino fue de la recolección, surge la idea de generar catálogos. Después surge la idea de ese catálogo sí mantenerlo, pero evolucionarlo, y se le adiciona solo una palabra, que fue la de único, un poco para focalizar la idea a los proveedores de información de que ese iba a ser el único referente para clasificar los delitos. Es decir, detrás del nombre está la idea de unificar o de crear una sola clasificación, que evoluciona en el 2008, y esto es por la razón de que el INEGI en el 2008 se hace autónomo. A partir de, bueno, la reforma constitucional ocurre en el 2006, pero en el 2008 ya empieza a operar el INEGI con su autonomía constitucional, y eso nos da otra perspectiva, y de ahí entonces cambiamos el nombre de de catálogo a clasificador, ya por atribuciones que teníamos de ley de establecer clasificadores a nivel nacional. Y la segunda es que era la mexicana, es decir, era de todo el país, ya no era de una autoridad, ya no era de un ámbito geográfico, era para todo el país. Bien, esta versión de clasificador cambia de nombre porque nos genera un poco de conflictos en términos políticos, es decir, la intención de un clasificador estadístico no era que las entidades federativas, no lo mencioné, pero México es un país federado, cada estado tiene su propio código penal, por lo tanto cada estado tiene sus propias definiciones de delitos y sus penalidades al respecto, pero la idea era no generar un catálogo para que ellos cambiaran su código penal, sino es simplemente para recolectar datos con fines estadísticos. Entonces el nombre evoluciona a clasificación estadística de delitos y eso ocurre entre el 2010 y el 2011. Pero después, derivado de toda una serie de discusiones que tuvimos en varios órganos colegiados que se crearon a partir de la autonomía del INEGI, en el Subsistema Nacional de Información de Gobierno, Seguridad Pública y Justicia, se da la necesidad de que esto ya sea normativo, es decir, que no sea un esfuerzo voluntarioso, que no sea a partir de el convencimiento mutuo de los usuarios, de los recolectores, de los proveedores de información, sino que sea una norma, que esto sea un ejercicio también legal, por lo tanto obligatorio. Entonces se crea en el 2011 lo que nosotros llamamos la norma técnica para la clasificación nacional de delitos del fuero común. Esta norma está vigente al día de hoy, es obligatorio para todos los que producen datos que tienen que ver con delitos, pero que los tienen que proveer para fines estadísticos. Esto ocurre en diciembre del 2011 y bueno, a la fecha ya llevamos varios años operándola y en este momento la estamos actualizando justamente porque los catálogos son dinámicos. El nacional, como el nombre lo dice, solamente se enfocó en delitos del fuero común, no incluía los del fuero federal, por lo tanto había nacido ya con una parte pendiente, que eran los delitos del fuero federal. Bien, esa es la historia de la clasificación de delitos en el país, en México. Y yo la clasificaría, aquí la puse en etapas, pero son las olas a las que yo me refería hace un momento. La primera etapa fue netamente empírica desde mi punto de vista, la segunda ya tiene un carácter técnico, tratamos de hacer clasificadores, pero esta última en la que nos encontramos yo la llamo científica, porque ya aprendimos de la experiencia, ya aplicamos las herramientas y ahora ya incluso estamos normando y estableciendo de una manera mucho más comprensiva o integral, mejor dicho, lo que es la clasificación de delitos. Cuando yo comparo este ejercicio con el ámbito internacional, y esto era fundamental para nosotros, porque si nos íbamos a sumar al esfuerzo de la clasificación internacional de delitos, pues teníamos que ver qué tan diferentes estábamos entrando al ejercicio de la clasificación internacional del delito. Y lo que podemos identificar en la parte internacional, con la misma lógica, en esta línea de tiempo, se remonta mucho más años atrás, 1853, de hecho bueno, Michael nos puede platicar más, nos ha platicado N reuniones que hemos tenido la historia de la clasificación internacional, ya nos la sabemos de memoria prácticamente, podría platicarla sin ver la lámina, pero bueno, en 1853 empieza esta historia con un primer esfuerzo que no logró concretarse, de recolección también de datos estadísticos. Esto se da a partir de una iniciativa en el Congreso General de Estadística en Bruselas, de ahí nos podemos saltar 20 años después, donde vuelve a darse una iniciativa que tampoco se concreta. Esta sucede en el Congreso Internacional para la Prevención y Castigo del Delito en Londres, en 1872, tampoco se concreta, es decir, se quedó en la intención, pero se reconoce la necesidad, al menos a nivel internacional. Y déjenme hacer un pequeñísimo paréntesis. En 1893 se publicó por primera vez, bueno, se publica la clasificación internacional en ese momento, llamada y estadística de enfermedades y problemas relacionados con la salud, que es la que actualmente conocemos como la clasificación internacional de enfermedades. ¿Por qué digo esto? Solamente voy a resaltar dos cosas. Quien inició el ejercicio para esa clasificación de enfermedades fue el Instituto Internacional de Estadística. Fueron ellos quienes iniciaron ese ejercicio. Después de varios años, 20 aproximadamente, pasa ya a la Organización Mundial de la Salud. Pero lo que quiero resaltar de este ejercicio es que esa clasificación, que también tiene muchos años, que responde a las mismas necesidades de estandarizar el entendimiento de fenómenos, en aquel caso de la salud, en el nuestro de delitos o la delincuencia, implicaba que trabajaran conjuntamente autoridades tanto de estadística como los que son los productores del dato. Eso es fundamental, cosa que ya está sucediendo en esta tercera ola, yo llamo internacional. Y bueno, ya es hasta mediados del siglo pasado cuando, a partir de una recomendación de la Comisión de Asuntos Sociales de Naciones Unidas, se establece que debe de haber una recolección uniforme de delitos a partir de un cuestionario que se reparte a todos los países. No se logra completar, los países no participan, y eso sube de nivel la discusión, la llevan hasta la Asamblea General en 1970, y ahí es donde se da el inicio del Crime Trend Survey, famoso, que nos piden cada año, que ya también es un clasificador de delito per se, lleva implícito una tabla de delitos con definiciones. Y eso es lo que da vida al CTS, que viene ahí referido en esta línea de tiempo. El CTS ya lleva 17 levantamientos, no todos son anuales, empezó cada 5 años, luego cada 3, luego cada 2, ya es anual, y ahí tenemos una referencia de clasificador del delito. Pero en Europa se empezaron a dar discusiones sobre clasificar los delitos, y surge una colección europea de estadísticas sobre delincuencia ya con un clasificador, pero obviamente solo para los países europeos, derivado de una serie de acuerdos que tuvieron en esa región geográfica, y eso dio pie en el 2011 a crear el marco internacional para la clasificación de delitos. Insisto, nuevamente en Europa, pero eso fue lo que dio pie a la discusión ya abierta, donde incluyeron a otras regiones del mundo, entre ellos Latinoamérica, obviamente. El INEGI tuvo una participación muy activa, ya lo refería Michael hace un momento, y eso es lo que nos lleva a final de cuentas a lo que Michael ya refería, a la publicación de la clasificación internacional del delito, que pues ya para nosotros es obligatorio en materia de estándares internacionales. Y si lo hacemos símil, pues pasaría algo muy parecido a las etapas o a las olas que vemos en México. Hubo una primera etapa, yo llamaría empírica, es decir, solo de recolección, una más técnica, donde ya, al menos en Europa, se empiezan a dar definiciones más claras y con un orden lógico, y la tercera, que para mí ya es la científica, que es la clasificación internacional del delito, incluso con la obligatoriedad que implica a quienes somos países miembros de Naciones Unidas. Y solamente resaltar precisamente que la implementación la empezamos a hacer en México en el 2011, a nivel internacional es este año el que se está discutiendo cómo implementarla, estamos discutiendo justamente cómo hacer el manual de implementación, y resaltar algunas notas al respecto de los dos casos, el de México y el internacional. El desarrollo es muy similar, tenemos 3 etapas básicamente. En el caso de la implementación, México inició en el 2011 con la publicación de la norma técnica, aunque solo para delitos del fuero común. Ya estamos en una segunda fase, que es la de actualización de nuestra clasificación nacional, y en el internacional los ejercicios de implementación pues en realidad empiezan desde que se aprobó, aunque este año ya estamos discutiendo más específicamente cuál va a ser el manual de implementación. Ahora déjenme platicar muy brevemente cómo lo estamos haciendo en México, que ese es uno de los puntos importantes. Lo primero es, así como Tomás ya nos platicaba que también hicieron en Alemania, pues tuvimos que hacer un ejercicio de alineación, es decir, ver qué tantas similitudes había en las dos clasificaciones. La nacional, que es la que ustedes ven en pantalla, incluye lo que nosotros llamamos en el nivel 1 los bienes jurídicos, son 7, y cada uno de esos bienes jurídicos tiene una cantidad de delitos específica, vienen en la tabla, no me voy a detener a decir cada uno, pero en la clasificación nacional tenemos lo que nosotros llamamos, que es la columna de la derecha, las características del delito, que nos permitiría, en una forma símil, por eso lo menciono, a la internacional, llegar al nivel 3 o 4 con esas características, y ahorita voy a poner un ejemplo. Es decir, de 41 delitos base que tiene la clasificación nacional en México, tenemos la posibilidad de llegar hasta 350 de manera muy específica, con las diferentes combinaciones que nos dan las características del delito, es por comisión, por forma de acción, por modalidad y los elementos que se utilizan para la comisión del delito. Esta es la internacional. Esta tabla nos resume la clasificación internacional. La clasificación internacional tiene 11 niveles, tiene 11 elementos o 11 componentes en su nivel 1, y tiene 3 niveles más, es decir, el 2, el 3 y el 4. A final de cuentas, lo que ustedes ven en la última columna es la totalidad de delitos que logra captar la clasificación internacional, que son 307. De esta, la alineación pues era un ejercicio relativamente sencillo, es decir, hacer el ejercicio de alineación pues no nos cuesta más que sentarnos en el escritorio y ver qué tantas coincidencias hay. Lo importante, lo difícil es la operación, y de ahí fuimos, como ustedes ven en pantalla, buscando dónde había justamente esas coincidencias en las definiciones. Entonces, el nivel, el bien jurídico 1, 2 y 5 de la clasificación mexicana coinciden con el del 1 y 2, igual que Tomás nos platicaba, a veces hay bueno, para el caso de Alemania, a veces encontramos delitos que pueden caer al menos, bueno, los delitos mexicanos que pueden caer en más de uno de los niveles de la clasificación internacional, y así sucesivamente. Entonces hicimos este ejercicio con cada uno de los niveles, fuimos identificando dónde estaban las coincidencias, algunos como este que son los delitos sexuales, pues todos coinciden en una sola categoría, los del patrimonio coincidían con 3 categorías internacionales, los de la sociedad, y bueno, en otros que tenemos delitos también había algunos que se asociaban a la clasificación internacional. Y bueno, ahí está, digamos, ese ejercicio de alineación que parece una telaraña, pero bueno, en la práctica nos ayudó bastante a ver cómo es que íbamos a lograr esa alineación. ¿Qué fue lo que hicimos? Ya una vez, y lo hicimos a partir del año pasado, en 2015, es decir, una vez que se aprobó la clasificación internacional, hicimos el ejercicio de alineación a partir de un instrumento que tenemos en México que se llama los Censos Nacionales de Gobierno, que recolectan información de todas las autoridades, las de seguridad pública, las de procuración de justicia, los juzgados y los sistemas penitenciarios. Les pedimos datos y este es el ejemplo al que quiero aterrizar la implementación que hicimos, porque lo hicimos para todos los delitos que ya habíamos en las tablas, pero quiero ejemplificar en uno, en el de robo. El robo en la clasificación nacional tiene la definición que se ve en pantalla, está en español, pero es apoderarse de cosa ajena a mueble sin el consentimiento de quien legítimamente puede disponer de ella. Pero ese delito en México, por la clasificación que tenemos, la podemos caracterizar. Si fue doloso o culposo, bueno, evidentemente un robo pues es doloso siempre, pero si fue con violencia o sin violencia, si fue simple, atenuado, agravado, calificado, si se utilizó un arma de fuego, un arma blanca, etcétera. Y eso ya nos permite abrir el abanico de posibilidades de clasificación del delito. En el caso de la clasificación internacional, y eso nos pasa mucho a los países latinoamericanos, tenemos 2 formas en las que se puede visualizar lo que para nosotros es el robo en México. Lo que se conoce como robo, que la definición es la misma, nada más que la diferencia radica en que hay uso de violencia, y el hurto, que es lo mismo pero sin el uso de la violencia. Entonces esa pequeña diferencia, que al menos en la clasificación internacional está incluso en 2 categorías distintas, a nosotros sí nos implicó un ejercicio importante de implementación, de tal manera que en la norma técnica tenemos robo y decíamos, bueno, ¿cómo lo vamos a clasificar? Pregunta simple, pues la definición, como ya decía, es la misma para la clasificación internacional y la norma técnica, o bueno, la clasificación nacional, con la diferencia que en la internacional se divide por violencia o sin violencia, y entonces lo teníamos que caracterizar, el delito, y para eso, entonces, de los más de 7.2 millones de registros que recolectamos el año pasado de delitos, en las diferentes etapas, sea procuración, juzgados, sistemas penitenciarios, etcétera, aquí ven ustedes la distribución, la mayor parte de ellos son en el ámbito de procuración de justicia. Entonces, de esos, el robo corresponde al 39% de esos 7.2 millones, y la distribución es muy similar ya por etapas, es lo que capta cada autoridad, pero de ahí nos quedamos solamente con los delitos de la etapa inicial. O sea, bueno, esto es para esta presentación, tomé solo los delitos en la etapa inicial, es decir, cuando se abre una investigación, que son más de 2.5 millones de registros. De ahí, de esos 2.5, el 62% los tenemos en la autoridad de investigación o de procuración de justicia. De ahí, también el comportamiento es muy similar, 1 millón de ellos corresponde a robo, y de esos el 63% otra vez están en justicia, es decir, el comportamiento es muy similar, pero esto es solamente para justificar por qué tomé el robo, porque el robo es de los que tiene las mayores proporciones, es decir, es un delito muy frecuente en términos de las averiguaciones previas o las investigaciones. Entonces, para clasificarlo ahora sí, digamos, este es un ejemplo muy simple pero muy esquemático, de los 655,000 registros que se tienen de robo, el 177,000, que es el 27%, se cometieron con violencia, es decir, esto lo podemos saber a partir de la clasificación nacional. El 61% se cometieron sin violencia, pero tenemos 79,000 donde no tenemos el dato, es decir, que la autoridad abre la investigación, pero no tiene elementos todavía para determinar si fue con violencia o sin violencia. Y por eso quise tomar la etapa inicial, porque esta es la parte donde se califica el delito, pero no necesariamente tenemos toda la información, la tenemos sí en otras etapas, ya cuando se determina el delito. Para reportar en la ICCS pues fue muy fácil, tomamos el 27% y lo mandamos a robo y el 61% a hurto, pero quería ejemplificar esto porque aquí hay retos a nivel internacional. Digo, esto es un caso, este es caso México, pero nos queda el reto de a dónde mandamos los 79,000. Y estos son de los casos que tenemos que discutir justo en el manual de implementación, o sea, qué reglas vamos a poner de conteo a partir de ejemplos tan simples como esto, es decir, ¿a dónde voy a mandar esos robos? ¿Los puedo mandar a robo o a hurto? ¿Cabría en cualquiera de los dos? ¿O aplico una regla de a ese 12%, el 61% lo mando de un lado, pero no sería lo correcto? Porque aquí no se valen estimaciones, tenemos que dar datos reales, ¿no? Entonces, para cerrar ya mi presentación, ¿cuáles son los retos justamente que yo quería resaltar de este ejercicio? Primero, en México, pues tenemos que concluir la actualización de la norma técnica, es decir, incluir los delitos del fuero federal para ya tener una alineación al 100% con la clasificación internacional. También en México estamos haciendo un manual de implementación, que bueno, ahí lo refiero, concluir el manual de implementación. Estamos elaborando una herramienta informática que nos va a permitir a través de la página web del Instituto del INEGI que todas las autoridades puedan entrar y buscar su delito a partir de la definición de su código penal y entonces que les dé toda la clasificación, tanto nacional como la internacional, y puedan ver justo desde la operación cuál es el ejercicio de clasificación. Continuar obviamente en las pruebas del ICCS, este es un año importante, vamos a hacer pruebas piloto del manual de implementación, vamos a hacer ejercicios con el CTS, etcétera. Entonces eso nos ayuda mucho justamente a afinar el ejercicio de alineación al ámbito internacional. Y el reto de toda la vida, fortalecer las capacidades estadísticas de los generadores del dato, que ese es el gran reto. Los que generan el dato no necesariamente su prioridad es ofrecerla para fines estadísticos, por lo tanto no desarrollan capacidades estadísticas. Entonces los institutos de estadística juegan un rol fundamental para al menos desde esa parte de la generación del dato cambiar los registros y el reporteo de información. Y bueno, con eso cierro mi presentación. Ante dudas o preguntas adicionales a las que nos van a hacer aquí, ahí están mis datos de contacto, los del INEGI, que han sido proporcionados aquí. Gracias, Michael, gracias a todos.
Muchas gracias, Edgar, por la presentación tan interesante. We are running out of time,
Okay.
so in order to have a little bit of time to answer questions, which I would encourage you to submit, to write down and submit to me, I will give the floor now to Alan immediately and ask him
I
to
certainly
stay
can
within the
be
time.
abbreviated. How much time would you like here?
No, please.
Okay, sure. Well, let me begin by doing a call out, a shout out to UNODC and INEGI. I can say without a doubt that this couldn't have been done without UNODC and INEGI working together. They've had the leadership on this, and I can appreciate the skill and the effort that has gone into it. And I must recognize Michael for his contribution. There's no question that his work and his tenacity on this has made this real and made this happen. There are many people, Enrico, certainly Angela, certainly Edgar, Salome, INEGI, and many others at INEGI, but clearly only possible because of that teamwork between UNODC and INEGI. And anytime you do something like this, you recognize the challenge of consensus, of bringing 40 countries together perhaps at one time, and everyone having a little opinion about how something should be. And the challenge, of course, was to keep things on track, to be open to listening to the intervention, not get sidetracked by large personalities or smaller personalities. I mean, all the human interaction that goes into this is not inconsequential, is not trivial. It is actually how the work progressed, and I'm appreciative of being involved at creation when the twinkle was still in the eye. Let me also make a comment that classification truly matters. If there's anything you come away with today, please come away with in belief that classification matters. It provides the basic heart of how we count how we analyze, how we can compare ourselves. It is the basic language of our work. And what we've done here is try to invent another language, a language that will provide us an ability to communicate with one another for the basic purpose of comparing, of saying, well, how are we doing relative to others? And one can embrace that, can do a lot of it or a little of it, but it does provide some guidelines and benchmarks for the field of criminology, of statistics, of crime control. And so I find that the ICCS is a major breakthrough for member nations, and I'm hopeful that along the way we will continue to keep an eye on the prize, and that is to enhance our ability to analyze data, to talk to issues that we can't talk to without some kind of common language. You know, we're not a field that is up to the challenge, up to a true taxonomy like the International Classification of Diseases that physicians use to classify disease. We're not to the stage yet in terms of information and collecting and recording of that information so as we can actually classify all the minutia into a 3-digit ICD code. We're not there yet, but we have a taxonomy that is pretty robust. And over time, I suggest that it's probably going to change and modify, but let's keep the eye on the prize and work on this for a little while before we get to a version 2.0 or whatever it is that we're headed towards. So thank you. It's been a pleasure. Let me say that I'd like to talk a little bit about our experience of trying to apply ICCS to crimes of sexual violence in the United States. And in doing so, I want to talk about some of the categories and definitions, our crime classifications that we have inherited in the US from the summary reporting system, that's the SRS here, and the NIBR system that has been in its infancy for some time and may have a rebirth soon. And the NIBRS is the National Incident-Based Reporting Statistics Program. And then finally, some correspondence tables, and then circle on back and give you another sales pitch on why you ought to adopt the ICCS. And so, the U.S. Crime reporting system is way behind the rest of the world, and has been for some time. And in some measure, it reflects our thinking back in the 1930s of law enforcement agencies and the kinds of crimes that were of interest at the time. We have a very decentralized system of justice in the United States, a federal system. We share brotherhood with Germany, but let me say we have it in spades. We have 18,000 different law enforcement agencies that all have some arrest powers that provide information into a system that's voluntary in nature. We can never compel law enforcement agencies to report. It would be a violation of federal, state, and local rights as outlined in our Constitution. We can only cajole. We can only convince that it's a good idea. We can't mandate. So these agencies submit data, a number of offenses known to the law enforcement, those offenses cleared by arrest or exceptional means, and provide some data on those arrested, basically age, sex, race, and persons arrested for each type of offense. So originally, back in the 1930s, it was designed as a summary reporting system. collecting data on 7 indexed crimes: murder, non-negligent manslaughter, rape, forcible rape, aggravated assault, robbery, burglary, auto theft, and larceny. In more recent years, we've had it kind of ad hoc, a couple of more offenses, arson being one of them. Another, more recently, is human trafficking. And so these got added to the system based on congressional requests, well, actually mandates, but that has gone rather slowly. Back in 1989, the FBI UCR program initiated an incident-based reporting system, NIBRS. And the NIBRS, of course, is disaggregated. It goes well beyond the 7, and actually 7 offenses to 59, and includes the nature and types of specific offenses in each incident, characteristics of the victim and offender, types and value of property stolen and covered, and characteristics of persons arrested. So, you know, it's a godsend for criminologists. I mean, if only we could have NIBRS implemented, we could do so much more and analyze the data in ways we can't when we have highly aggregated summary statistics. So the NIBRS was launched in 1989, and the implementation went rather slowly. Some states passed laws that required all the law enforcement agencies within the state to provide data through NIBRS. Others did not. Some law enforcement agencies converted to NIBRS. Many did not. And largely what we have is coverage of about 1/3 of the country in terms of population and in terms of crime. And until recent years, we've kind of hit a threshold where the increment in NIBRS adoption has leveled off, only increased in minor ways, and barring intervention, was unlikely to be expanded. Now, why is that? It's because information costs money. Information is expensive. If you try to convert from a summary system to an incident-based system, it's going to cost money. And when you have large law enforcement agencies, like the city of Philadelphia, that has its own kind of NIBRS-like incident-based system, they're not so convinced that they need to correspond and comply with a national incident-based reporting system. The incident-based data are only good for those who collect and utilize it. So law enforcement agencies have to have a need, have to have a desire to collect the information to incur the cost of conversion and maintenance. And so here we are in 2014, and implementation of the ICCS depends on incident-based data. We can't go very far with 7 summary indexed crimes to map into the ICCS. And so we believe strongly that successful ICCS implementation depends on the implementation of NIBRS. Now, a few years back, we thought, well, okay, we're never going to get full implementation. Let's be good statisticians. So let's sample agencies and work with those agencies to become NIBRS compliant. So rather than count crime, we can estimate crime by crime type. And so we developed a sampling strategy of 400 agencies, and when combined with the current NIBRS participating agencies, could provide national representative estimates. Now, it just so happens that the 40 agencies sampled with a certain strategy represent about 35% of the nation, 35% of the crime. So together we would have 70% of the nation covered if we were to have full NCSX implementation. But something happened. Many things happened in the United States in recent years. We've had incidents of police misconduct. We have had incidents of homicide by law enforcement agencies. We have had allegations of excessive use of force. We've had a whole series of things that have convinced law enforcement agencies that they need information. They need data, and they need it to go beyond simply the summary data that we currently have. And so, with the leadership of Director Comey of the FBI, there's been a conversion and a commitment on the part of the agencies to adopt NIBRs for reporting year 2021. So on January 1st, 2021, according to the APB, Advisory Policy Board, the summary system will end. We know that it's not all going to happen on day one. There's got to be some kind of bridge, statistical bridge, to understand the trends in crime and not lose those trends in crime. And so we work together with the FBI and the Advisory Policy Board. FBI is all in, committed to NIBRs conversion, and now we're in the midst of converting and encouraging states to be ready for the NIBRs data. So 17 states need to be certified, develop programs for collecting and processing the data through the state program that will ultimately be submitted to the FBI's UCR program. BJS is also providing financial support, technical support to the 72 law enforcement agencies with 750 sworn officers or greater. So we're in a full effort to implement NIBRs, and if it were not for NIBRs and NIBRs implementation, we would probably be the least compliant with ICCS. And so, let me go through a brief discussion of Section 3, injurious acts of a sexual nature. I happen to do a lot of work in this area. And these are the classification codes for in ICCS. And you will notice one thing here, and in some countries this may not be an anomaly. For us it is. Statutory rape is now considered sexual violence, and before in the UCR, rape involved forcible rape up until about 2013, and then the FBI changed its definition to include rape that was not sexual penetration without consent. So consent may be involved, absence of consent may involve force or not force. So we have categories here in ICCS that are at odds and different from the historical tradition for the US. And similarly, we have categories of sexual assault. This is a category that's somewhat broader here than in the US, and I'll go into that in a minute. And we have a whole new classification of sexual exploitation. And many of these codes in the US, particularly with respect to prostitution, respect to possession, distribution of obscene materials, and particularly involving kids, are considered acts against society and not considered acts of violence against people. And some of ICCS is actually moving that concept of sexual exploitation into an area outside of the envisioning it as crime against society and actually having real victims. So prostitution involves victims. Child prostitution particularly involves victims. And so that's some of the granularity to it. I'm going to skip through these, given that I'm already getting the hook. And so we have crime categories in the summary system and in NIBRs. Attempts or assaults to commit rape are included as rape in in the FBI system. Statutory rape, incest, bestiality are things that are outside of that system. ICCS brings them in. There's a whole issue of consent where the old FBI definitions were involved force, and now we have sexual intercourse procured through deception, drug and alcohol facilitated, and individuals unable to consent. So I think this is considerable modernization of the concept of sexual victimization that is reflected in the ICCS. So we have specific detail here, but the key to implementing ICCS is the utilization of neighbors in combination with attributes or tags that are envisioned in the ICCS. And so in the course of classification, we need to identify whether there was a weapon involved or force involved. That comes through in neighbors as a data element 13. When it comes to some of the sexual exploitation measures, we need the type of victim as well as the age of victim. So the data element 25 would identify whether it was society or individual, and age of victim, of course, under the age of 18 would put it into the child exploitation or pornography area. So neighbors, 59 categories in combination with other key data elements allows us to do a more fine-grained mapping into the ICCS. So let me, I'm not going to burden you with the grit here. So why should the ICCS be adopted? Well, one of the things that we did along the way is we organized a panel at the National Academies of Science on modernizing the nation's crime statistics. We solicited and funded a 3-year effort to develop a classification system for statistical purposes. And lo and behold, the NAS panel fully embraced the ICCS. Now, of course, there are American, US permutations, modifications given our interests and past experience of collecting the data. But as Michael said, it's a near a full embrace with few, if not less meaningful changes. So the NAS panel, I think, has provided us a good first step to take the ICCS seriously and to make an effort to think about crime in new ways. So it's going to enhance our statistical ability down the line. It's going to provide us with benchmark guidelines for internal harmonization. Let me say in a national statistical agency such as ours, which we're collecting data from a variety of actors, whether it be law enforcement or prosecutors or courts or correctional agencies, they all use different codes. They all are using their own home brew, and you have to spend a great deal of time putting it and putting it into harmony, so that every statistical collection is defining things in the same way. So we will be using the ICCS for that harmonization enterprise. Let me also say that the ICCS tells us where there are holes in our statistical system, in our infrastructure. And there are holes. We have a statistical infrastructure that's largely based on street crime, crimes of concern back in the 70s and 80s, 1970s and 80s. And there's a whole emerging area of crime that our systems, our collection systems, our infrastructure may be somewhat weak at collecting. So the first step is recognizing where those holes are. The ICCS provides us with kind of a inventory of those holes. So, there are many emerging crimes involving fraud and various new forms of fraud, certainly stalking, identity theft, various forms of individual victimization, and then on the other hand, we have very little good data on corporate crime, environmental crime, crimes that are more regulatory in our country, but nevertheless crimes. Those are crimes that are not well measured, and so we have asked the NAS panel to give us advice as to how to fill some of those holes, and also how to proceed with implementing the ICCS. So it's a great opportunity for us. It comes at a very opportune moment, somewhat accidental perhaps, but without the support of the NIS panel, without implementation of NIBRs by law enforcement agencies throughout the nation, we couldn't even come close to being consistent with the ICCS.
Thank you, Alan. So I recognize that we are a bit late, but I ask you kindly to bear with us since we had to start a bit later. We should take the time to address some of the questions that were asked. If there are any urgent questions, I would ask you to submit them more. So to perhaps start with two questions that seem to be explaining a bit more on the structure of how the ICCS is built, I would like to direct a question perhaps first to Alan, and a related question to Edgar. So it says that many national statistics record both attempted and completed offenses together, with the exception of homicides. How does the ICCS handle this? And I think this is an easy question for you to answer. Maybe Alan starts with this one, because for Edgar, there's a similar question. It says that and I suppose this is a national act, the PND, both in Spanish and in English, establishes the inclusion of the gender perspective, yeah, and we know that there are differences in crime suffered by men and women, for example, sexual assaults and murders and so on. And both, how does the ICCS handle gender differences, and how is it done in the technical norms of Mexico? So if Alan can say something on the attempts and maybe on the tax system in general.
So briefly, you know, there is some commingling of completed and attempts, particularly when it comes to threats and whether a threat is an attempt or not. And so some categories actually involve threats, but more generally, they involve tags, where we have the coding scheme and then an additional set of items that involve circumstances or characteristics in more detail, such as attempt or completed or conspiracy to commit. Those kind of three dimensions of crime.
Sobre un poco cómo se atiende desde la recolección también la información que tiene que ver con cuestiones de género, o sea, y su vinculación a la parte del ICCS. Bueno, ICCS tiene tags, lo que se llaman tags, etiquetas en español, exactamente, que es una manera de desagregar la información a final de cuentas dentro de la estructura del ICCS. No solamente tiene esas desagregaciones por sexo, tiene muchas otras. Para el efecto, y digamos, esa es la manera en la que la estructura del ICCS lo atendería. ¿Cómo lo hacemos nosotros desde el ámbito nacional? Pues desde la captación del dato, evidentemente también se solicitan estas desagregaciones cuando la víctima es una persona física. Evidentemente tenemos algunos otros delitos que no necesariamente se relacionan con personas físicas y hay las desagregaciones respectivas, ¿no? Pero es la manera en la que se hace. En el caso mexicano yo me concentré tal vez en un delito en el ejercicio que explicaba en la presentación, pero otros que tienen que ver con cuestiones de carácter sexual pues tienen mucho que ver con cuestiones de género, delitos muy sensibles al respecto y bueno, se captan en esa medida de manera muy específica, delitos como el feminicidio que ya por sí solos llevan el aspecto de género incluido, se captan así desde el origen y bueno, se van reportando y alineando incluso a la estructura del ICCS.
Okay, thank you for this explanation, and perhaps another explanation that Thomas can address and explain to us, based on his work or so. The question is starting from the fact that statisticians cannot change the criminal law, nor do we want to. With the help of the ICCS, it's not a normative instrument. We recognize that as long as national statistics refer to nationally defined offenses, there will be national deviations from the ICCS, at least initially in the data collection. So how could these deviations be documented in order to analyze the data properly? And I think you have a very good experience with this.
Thank you, Michael. In doing mapping ICCS, we made a sign in metadata whether we fit completely to the ICCS definition or whether we fit partly or whether we fit neither the one, neither the others. And for example, murder, I showed you, we fit perfectly. So it is a complete match to ICCS intentional homicide. There are some other offenses, it is only a partly match because in the criminal law you cannot distinguish in the same way ICCS requested. So like we did so far in UNOCTS questionnaire, we mentioned in the metadata, we mentioned whether we can fit the requested definitions or not, or partly, and UNCTS will be revised in 2017 regarding to the ICCS, and so we do the same in UNCTS questionnaire reporting, as our priority is to map all the offenses requested in UNCTS questionnaire. So that's one aspect, and another aspect is if there is a ICCS implementation manual, we will have a section in it, and we can document our way of mapping.
Thank you, Thomas. If I may add, UNODC is currently supporting the process of mapping, of testing the mapping of national classifications into the ICCS. And in the process, we also want to build up a manual that I've mentioned for implementing, for building these correspondence tables. And one of the things that we have been thinking about is to make a repository, a collection of such correspondence tables that will be a resource for researchers and anybody who wants to understand how national definitions deviate from the ICCS when it comes to published data. But that will also take some time and will depend on how many countries provide us with full correspondence tables, and how the process of reviewing this information will progress, and we hope to also pair countries together so that countries can, let's say, work in pairs of 2 or 3 together to review each other's correspondence tables and help each other in the process. There is a short question, hopefully simple to answer, for Edgar. Would the ICCS substitute the national classification?
No.
Thank you, Edgar.
No, es evidentemente la clasificación internacional, y de manera muy similar, como comentaba Allen en su presentación, nos está ayudando también a complementar la nuestra. De hecho, la publicación de la clasificación internacional de alguna manera nos obligó a acelerar los trabajos en el ámbito nacional para incluir los delitos del fuero federal y poder estar alineados. No es una sustitución, es más bien una complementariedad. Nos ayuda también a entender de una mejor manera el fenómeno del delito contra otros países, es decir, la comparabilidad. Entonces, es más bien un ejercicio que nos ayuda a complementar y enriquecer mucho la nacional.
Gracias. And I have a final question here. I don't know who exactly would be best placed to answer this. For violent crime, how well does the ICCS map onto the International Classification of Disease codes for violence-related injuries? So I would guess the question is, what is the relation between the ICCS and the ICD, now in its 10th version? And I guess the question is directed especially for violence-related offenses, I assume. Please.
En México tenemos una experiencia muy interesante al respecto de este ejercicio, porque captamos datos que tienen que ver con homicidios a partir de la autoridad de salud, las estadísticas de defunción. Tenemos un certificado de defunción y ahí, a partir de la clasificación internacional de enfermedades, se clasifican las muertes que tienen que ver con aspectos externos y que son violentos, y esa definición es muy similar a lo que podríamos llamar homicidio doloso en México o intencional para efectos internacionales. No sustituye una a la otra, pero son muy importantes. O sea, no es que una sea más válida que la otra, pero sí nos ayudan como variables de control las dos definiciones, porque nos permite ver un mismo fenómeno pensando en este delito en particular, que es violento y que además es de los que atentan contra bienes jurídicos muy preciados como es la vida. Nos permite como variable de control ver qué está captando la autoridad de salud con ese clasificador, con sus propias definiciones, y en el ejercicio de comparación y de alineación vemos los homicidios dolosos que capta la autoridad de justicia, y entonces podemos ver patrones de comportamiento. Y quería referir a este ejercicio porque en México justamente tenemos la posibilidad de ver esos dos datos a partir de cómo clasifica la autoridad de salud con la clasificación internacional de enfermedades, ese hecho para ellos y para nosotros ese delito, y tienen un comportamiento. Si pudiera proyectar una gráfica al respecto, ustedes podrían ver cómo los dos datos se mueven igual, con pequeñas diferencias, lo cual es natural, pero se mueven en las mismas tendencias, lo cual nos ayuda bastante. Entonces son ejercicios muy complementarios para el análisis delictivo.
Okay, thank you, Edgar. I think it also refers back to what Thomas was showing in his presentation, the 3 elements of the definition of intentional homicide in the ICCS. I think the major difference here is that in the ICCS there's a 3rd element that's not in the classification of diseases, which is the legal aspect. And that may be an important aspect when it comes to certain types of deaths due to violence that may be considered legal in the sense of non-criminal or non-illegal for example, self-defense or other behaviors. It also has a bearing on war-related acts, although they are excluded from the ICD as well, and certain other types of intentional homicides. But I invite you also to take a look at the International Classification of Crime. I have brought a few copies. There were a few people also from our office that should be recognized, not only for carrying, but for collaborating and for taking forward the development of the ICCS. My colleagues in the office of UNODC, both in Vienna and at the Center of Excellence, and everybody who collaborated and contributed to this really long collaborative exercise. You can find the ICCS and a lot of documentation and material on the internet. I brought a few copies here in English. I think there are more copies in Spanish available, maybe outside on the table. I brought a few in French and one in Russian if there is urgent demand. Otherwise, I will have to carry this one back. But thank you very much for your assistance and asistencia, for your being here, and apologies for being a bit late. Thank you very much.